My name is Hank Smith. I'm interviewing Marvetta Rutherford. Did I get your name right?
You did.
Okay. She's a former resident of East Cleveland, and we're going to do this interview. Today is May 22nd at approximately 10:15 a.m. Thank you, Ms. Rutherford, for giving me an opportunity to interview you. First, what we would like to do is maybe start by telling us a little bit about yourself and where you've been, and just give us a little history of yourself and how it led you to East Cleveland.
My family moved into East Cleveland when I was in diapers, and we were a multi-generational family, replacing an Italian one. And they were a good family because they left the house in great condition. They also left many items such as books that we could use during our time in the home. East Cleveland at that time was a very clean area, and there were all sorts of productive businesses of varying sorts, and it was pristinely clean and very green. The first person that my mother turned me over to was the school crossing guard, and his name was Herbie. And he was an old white man who held my hand and gently took me across the street to Roselle Elementary School on Phillips Avenue. On the small scale, I thought that my experience growing up in East Cleveland was different, in a large part to do with my name, because Marvetta is not a common name. But on the national level, what was happening to many black individuals really didn't mirror what my reality was in East Cleveland. I could go into different stores and be treated very fairly, very, hospitably, for lack of better words, from the butcher's store with the sawdust on the floor to Sam's, who was the corner store. He was an old white man, and he had all kinds of great candy and whatnot. You know, my neighborhood was wonderful during the early years.
This was in what area of East Cleveland?
East Cleveland on Superior, and I lived on Melbourne, and that was very close to Cleveland. So my mom allowed me to walk from Roselle on Superior to Lakeview, okay? And really, you didn't have any need to go anyplace else, because in that span on both sides of the street, it was a wonderful place to go and spend your money and to see the different commerce that was there. But that shortly changed, okay?
But how old were you when you?
Well, during this time, this was like from 5 years old until the riots, Lakeview riots, okay? And matter of fact, the first day of sadness that I really remember in East Cleveland was when Kennedy was assassinated. It seemed like everybody was crying, and understandably so. The second time was when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And that occurred on Family Night, which was an annual tradition at Roselle. And therefore it was terminated because nobody wanted to be jovial on such a bad occasion. My love of the written and spoken word was nurtured at Roselle. My librarian there, May Eubank, taught me how to be a librarian, how to read the Dewey Decimal System. And the love of music was also fostered throughout the education that I received in East Cleveland. Arts and the various levels through the school system were excellent until a certain point in time. And I will say that that was around the time that I was leaving junior high and getting ready to enter into high school. You could sense as a student the change in the excellence that was called for in their students, okay? And you know, one thing about it I remember too, on the occasions that you had to call the police, before you could put the cradle down on the phone, they would be at your door, and they would be there to protect and serve, okay? We also had wonderful services. I remember we used to get our trash picked up on Mondays and Thursdays. The trash men would come in the back and deposit the cans in an orderly fashion. I remember walking by the city services garages and the depot areas where they had tall areas of rock and gravel and cement and sand and all of these things to keep the city looking its best. And inspections. See, I remember as a child that they would come out and they would do inspections and make sure that your property was kept up to par. Okay, there was a span of time of at least 30 years that I didn't see another inspector in the city until we were trying to sell my mother's home, okay? When I was a kid, we had places to play. Right behind Roselle was Patterson Park. And at that time, it was a beautiful, vibrant area. We had the Red House there. And at the Red House, doing art and crafts were encouraged. That's what we did in the summertime. We had a lot of projects and a lot of things that taught us about nature and about what kind of leaves not to be around and whatnot. And they had basketball there. They had trails that you could ride your bike on. They had baseball diamonds. They had tennis courts. And if you went far enough and crossed the street over into Cleveland, you would be at the swimming pool. So it was a paradise for a kid, you understand? You really didn't have to go to Forest Hill unless you just wanted to, and I did, you know. Black Power came in during one summer and everything changed. Some things immediately, as in the white flight, and other things have slowly eroded into what is right now in East Cleveland. By the time I got to the 9th grade, I'd gone from being a straight A student to being pregnant with my first child. The nation, and as well as the city, had begun to change also. The Huff riots and other disruptions caused many to move into the city. The fabric of the people changed. In 1972, our class went into high school. And again, the climate there changed too. Shaw High School and the elements that were now there brought about the need for walkie-talkies, because prior to that, we didn't need that. We had also 2 shootings, one being of a student in between classes, the other during a Winter Sports Queen pageant, of which I was a participant. I graduated in June 1976 with my class that I started with in kindergarten and almost 800 other students. My diploma, as well as license in cosmetology, was from the last 2 years that I spent at Shaw in the vocational school. And it was almost like being a medical doctor, because that course required you to know your bones, your muscles, everything from the top of your head to your breast. And so as a young married woman, I also saw the decline in services in East Cleveland. I moved back into East Cleveland into property that was owned by Mike Federico. He had bought up a bunch of old buildings, and with the help of the powers that were in office at that time, he failed to address heavily infestation in his buildings. And because people were not knowledgeable about putting their money into escrow and whatnot, he also had a great time evicting people because they did not want to pay to live in substandard housing. I happened to have taken him to court, and at that time, Judge Mosley had come in, and I filed all the writs with the court to get my deposit back and never received a dime. That was how effective the clerk of courts was back in the early 80s. Mr. Federico, though, was later murdered on the same site, and I don't know if the police ever solved his murder. There are many unsolved murders in the city of East Cleveland. You know, there are plenty of other issues that have yet to be solved, such as economic failure, and also criminal activity by various elected officials that we have nowadays. Right now, the city of Cleveland, or East Cleveland rather, has, back in the day, they got an award of $7 million to develop the Hayden Peninsula. Many people were displaced, forced to sell their homes, and at the same time, the city of Berea got $7 million too. Now the difference between Berea and East Cleveland is that East Cleveland got Silverman's right after the mysterious fire at the building on 130th and St. Clair. We got Silverman's and we got Church's Chicken. That cost us $7 million.
This was around what year?
This was like in the early 80s. Again, this was when various officials were in. I'm not sure if we had a mayor, but I do know that the council existed with people like my neighbor, May Stewart, and I did have a neighbor who showed us the paperwork from HUD that they had gotten awarded this money. Berea, by the way, developed the Berea Commons, which had shops, it had homes. It is still a vibrant part of the city. Needless to say, I think Silverman's is closed now, and if it's not closed, it's about the only thing happening on that peninsula. And their other stores have since closed in the various regions in the city. The places to go when I was a child in East Cleveland were endless. We had two theaters, the Continental on Euclid and the Hayden Shaw Theaters. We had an ice skating rink. We had Forest Hills Park with Grandpappy Hill. That alone in itself is a legend. If you haven't been, you have to go. But then we had also the Euclid Superior Shopping Mall. And that shopping strip had 5 and dime dimers. It had the A&P. We had Roselle Drug Store at 125th. We had Rose Plastic Factory, which spanned across the complete area, a whole city block. And it employed people. Back in the day when our grandmothers and our parents, everybody had plastic covering. And so we had businesses, you understand? And General Electric was a place that employed people. It was a real entity within the city, and not just at the holiday time, you understand? Things were actually manufactured there. They made a great buck of money while they were there. Manners and Bob's Big Boy graced Euclid Avenue. And we had hardware stores along Superior where you could get custom-made paints to either do your cars or your homes. And you know, one of my earliest political memories was working on a campaign of Charles Bibb, who this was his first time running, but seeing that he had owned several businesses in East Cleveland, I felt that he would be a good candidate to serve the city in the way that it needed to be served. I remember the white flight, and I remember when whites quickly became the minority, because when I moved there, we definitely were the minority. It was very heavily white. I saw the city of John Rockefeller grow from being a neighborhood of mansions to what it is today. You see, the homes in East Cleveland are comparable. with other suburbs like Lakewood, Cleveland Heights. The upper tier mansions are comparable to the mansions in Bracknell. And we have a history to preserve. And we have a renaissance that needs to come back. Like Harlem, the people who remain are a mixture. Some of them are apathetic, and many appear almost zombie-like. And then there are others frightened because the security tapes that they have made at their homes of the break-ins, the offenders are only getting a couple of weeks in the court system. See? And while you're in court, I've been told that literally rats are falling out the ceiling because that building is heavily infested, both literally and figuratively, okay? Hasn't been renovated since the 60s. And of course, these issues have not been addressed. The same city that angered me back in the 90s when I lived in Canton and I would come up and visit my parents every weekend is sliding down the toilet. And I thank the Norton administration, because out of all the mayors and all the city managers and all the other stuff that has come, he really has been the worst. You see, now the HUD funding of about $2 million has been cut. You have no major hospital in a city that has trauma all the time. And no respect, and no repurpose for these buildings. Just like Huron Road, that's a historic landmark that's gone. It had been renovated with millions of dollars put in by the Cleveland Clinic as well as Meridian Hospital, and repurposed so that women would not have to travel so far to have their children. Repurposed so that people like my mother could come there for help when they were sick. And repurposed because now people who are shot are most likely to die because they have to go all the way to the west side while they're bleeding. As well, the current health care for the city employees is questionable. They owe Kaiser close to $1 million. And I've sat in the fiscal meetings. They don't know where this money is coming from, see. The credit records show, audit records show that over $41 million has been spent by the Norton administration without authorization. So much so that the fiscal board is now being monitored by the state entities. Almost every branch of government that you can think of by the state is now sitting in while the mayor is being told, you cannot spend any more money because we don't have any more money. This is now the end of May. I question, in all reality, will there be money available to pay for the city services in the month of June? Because what's happened, besides the re-election campaign of Norton being funded by the same company who put in the traffic cameras, okay, who is headed by William Fambro, who is also one of the clowns that fudged up the work over at the East Cleveland Library with the fiasco there with Sheba Marcus Bay. You know, he is also the head of the cable company that is being paid out of the city of East Cleveland.
Who is that, Fambro?
Fambro is the head of the cable company, Channel 9, that hums when you try to listen to what goes on at the hall meetings and whatnot. That's him. He also works at the Helen S. Brown Center, okay? And he is one of the principals in the traffic camera company.
Isn't he also On the board of directors at the public library?
That's what I just said. I sat there and I witnessed him fire Sheba Marcus Bay, he and his cronies. And of those cronies, Charles Bibbs was one of them. They had absolutely no grounds to fire her. And in a city that the homes are falling in on each other, I find it hard to believe that you could dismiss this woman, have to pay her her salary, and you don't have the money. Do you understand? Okay, because if you got $100,000 to throw it at some economic development. God knows that's what the city needs. So again, you have the various branches of state government overseeing the city. Too bad it wasn't there at the beginning of the $41 million that has somehow mysteriously been